In the previous short video lecture about chemicals and the environment, I mentioned U.S. federal legislation and a couple laws. Those laws were the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act, otherwise known as EPCRA, the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990, and the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act of 1996. There was a law called TSCA that was passed as well, and from this law, the Toxic Release Inventory was established. The TRI provides an annual record of releases of over 650 chemicals by about 22,000 different facilities. The facilities that have to report their releases of chemicals include any facility that has at least 10 full-time employees and manufacture a certain amount of TRI toxic chemical per year. So some categories of these facilities include manufacturing, coal and oil electricity generation facilities, certain mining facilities, hazardous waste management facilities, and federal facilities. Small shops and homes and small industries that release chemicals into the air, water, and land are not covered if they release less than 500 pounds per year. The TRI also excludes gas stations and personal residences or households. So there are an additional 3.2 billion pounds of chemicals per year that are released by these small businesses and households, but they're not included in the TRI dataset. In general, the chemicals that are covered by the TRI program are those that cause cancer or other chronic human health effects, any chemical that causes adverse acute human health effects, or any chemical that causes adverse environmental impacts or effects. So each year, any facility that falls under the guidelines of the TRI must report on each chemical that that facility stores or utilizes. This TRI chemical list doesn't include all toxic chemicals used in the U.S., but instead it's a very specific pointed list to address those chemicals that, again, cause cancer, have adverse acute human effects, or adverse environmental effects. So why was the Toxic Release Inventory created here in the U.S.? Well, it's a spin-off of an incident that happened back in the 80s, actually two incidences. One was in Bhopal, India, in December of 1984. A methyl isocyanate gas was released at a Union Carbide chemical pesticide plant, and this incident was considered the world's worst industrial disaster. The Union Carbide chemical pesticide plant produces a pesticide called Sevin. It's spelled S-E-V-I-N. After this methyl isocyanate gas was released, about 4,000 people died within the first few days. The initial effects of exposure were coughing, severe eye irritation, and a feeling of suffocation, burning in the respiratory tract, breathlessness, stomach pain, and vomiting. People that awakened by these symptoms and fled away from the plant. Those who ran inhaled more than those who had a vehicle to ride in. Also, children and other people that were shorter in stature inhaled higher concentrations because the gas collected lower near the ground than higher in the air. Within 2 weeks, 8,000 more people died. Over 500,000 people were exposed, and thousands more suffered permanent disabling injuries, and more died due to long-term health effects. Survivors continue to suffer with permanent disabilities as a result of this gas leak in 1984. Also, within a few days, trees in the vicinity became barren of their leaf cover, and many animals died. The facility was closed in 1986. As a result, pipes, drums, and various tanks were sold. The facility did encompass a couple different plant locations, so the MIC plant and the Sevin plant are still there, as are storages of different residues. However, the area around the plant was used as a dumping ground for various hazardous chemicals. In 1982, there were some wells in the vicinity of this factory that had to be abandoned. Tests were conducted in 1989, and it revealed that the soil and the water samples collected from near the factory and inside the plant were toxic to fish. Other studies showed polluted soil and groundwater in the area. The polluting compounds included naphthalene, the pesticide 7, mercury, toxic organochlorines, chromium, copper, lead, hexachloroethane, hexachlorobutadiene, and various pesticides. Soon after the incident happened, legal proceedings involving the Union Carbide chemical plant, the U.S., the government of India, local Bhopal authorities, and disaster victims started immediately. Civil and criminal cases were filed in the District Court of Bhopal, India, and the CEO at the time of the disaster, Warren Anderson. In June of 2010, 7 former employees, including the former chairman, were convicted in Bhopal of causing death by negligence, and they were sentenced to 2 years in prison, and they had a fine of about $2,000 each, the maximum punishment allowed by the law in India. Eventually, in and out of court settlements reached a verdict in 1989, and Union Carbide agreed to pay up to $470 million for damages caused by this gas leak. This amount was immediately paid by the end of October in 2003, compensation had been awarded to over 554,000 people for injuries received because of the gas leak incident. Also, compensation was given to about 15,000 survivors of those family members that were killed. The average amount that was provided to the families of the people that had died was about $2,200 per person that died. It doesn't seem like there was fair compensation provided to the people that lived in the community where this gas incident happened. Overall, the total amount paid out by Union Carbide was about $1.2 billion. So the Bhopal, India incident received global attention in relationship to all the people that died and people that suffered from long-term permanent disabilities as a result of it. A year later, in West Virginia, in Institute, West Virginia, a similar chemical release occurred. 10 people were hospitalized. Not as many people impacted like that which occurred in Bhopal, India. But the point is that we had a release occur in the United States in which 10 people had to be hospitalized. And this really created increased concern in the U.S. about chemical accident preparedness and availability of information on toxic chemical releases from industrial facilities. Hence, the TRI was created in order to track the chemicals that are being released into the air, land, and water, as well as accidentally spilled. The map on the screen in front of you depicts the locations of all the reporting facilities in the United States. Notice that there seems to be a majority of facilities in the Mississippi River watershed and east of the Mississippi River watershed. And many are scattered around the Great Lakes region as well. I'm going to show you data from the TRI for the nation, for the state of Pennsylvania, and for Dauphin County, specifically where Harrisburg Area Community College is located. On your screen is the TRI Explorer website, which compiles all the data into retrievable format so that we can better understand what is being depicted. So the TRI fact sheet for the United States is dated 2016, and it indicates that about 21,000 different facilities reported the toxic releases into the air, land, or water. Total production-related waste managed was about 27 billion pounds, and it's estimated that about 609 million pounds were released into the air, 190 million pounds released into the water, and 2.2 billion pounds released onto the land. The total on-site and off-site disposal or other releases was 3.4 billion pounds. As we scroll down, the graphics provided help us understand what was done with the waste, whether it was disposed of or released into the environment, whether it was treated, whether it was recovered for energy use, or whether it was recycled. Source reduction is the primary goal of dealing with this hazardous waste materials, and disposal or other releases is the least preferable. So from 2003 through 2016, if you look at this data, it does appear that we've increased our recycling of these waste materials over time. It appears that the energy recovery has stayed somewhat the same, as well as the treatment has stayed somewhat the same, with some years having less treatment occur. And this is national data. This graphic depicts what happened to the on-site releases in terms of did it go into the air, the land, or the water. According to the data, it depicts that most of the releases over time since 2003 were released onto the land. We used to have more releases that were released into the air, and the amount of releases into the air has declined steadily over time since 2003. The top 5 facilities by the total disposal or other releases in the United States from the 2016 data are listed on this graphic. A metal mining company was responsible for the largest releases in the nation. Another metal mining company was the second largest release, and this was the Kennecott, Utah copper mine. Additional metal mining company, again, Newmont Mining Company and Creeks Mine. And then we had a smelter and refinery industry that dealt with primary metals as the 5th industry. And each of these industries disposed of their waste or released it onto the land. This graphic depicts the top 5 chemicals that released to air and water. In terms of air, we have a category for other, which represents 41%. The ammonia accounted for releases of 20%. Methanol was 17%. Sulfuric acid was 10%. Hydrochloric acid was 7%. And hexane was 6%. In terms of releases into the water, nitrate compounds encompassed 88% of the releases into the water. This is likely stemming from wastewater treatment plants or industrial wastewater treatment facilities. Manganese compounds were 3%, ammonia was 2%, methanol was 2%, sodium nitrate 1%, and others represented the 3% category. So as far as what's going into our water nationwide, it's primarily the nitrates. Now this is the TRI fact sheet for Pennsylvania, and you can compare the values. It appears that total production related waste managed was 4.1 billion pounds for Pennsylvania, compared to the 27 billion pounds across the United States. Pennsylvania is ranked 12th out of 56 states nationwide based on the total releases per square mile. And this map depicts the facilities and the number of facilities located across Pennsylvania. So there's 23 facilities and 18 facilities right within the vicinity of Harrisburg that document their toxic releases into the air, land, and water, and report those values annually to the Toxic Release Inventory.